Tonight, we are traveling to the Roman countryside 2,000 years ago. Beside a long stone road, in the quiet dark before sunrise, there is a small inn. Most of the travelers sleeping inside are still asleep, but the woman who runs the inn is already awake. Her name is Julia. She has run this place for many years. She knows every sound the building makes, the way the fire in the kitchen oven settles at night, the way the courtyard gate moves slightly when the wind comes from the east, the way the road outside sounds different before dawn than it does at midday. Something to do with the air, something to do with the stillness. She is sitting on the edge of her bed in the small room behind the kitchen. She sits for a moment, not moving, just listening. Somewhere outside, far down the road, there is the faint sound of wheels on stone. Someone is already traveling. She stands and reaches for her sandals. The stone floor is cold under her feet. This is the first thing every morning. Before the light, before anything else, the cold pressing up through her soles. She wraps a cloth around her shoulders. She picks up the oil lamp from the shelf and carries it through the low doorway into the kitchen. The kitchen is the largest room in the building, with a ceiling high enough for cooking smoke to rise away. Along one wall, a large clay oven is built into the stone. Along another, shelves hold clay pots and bowls and the wooden tools of daily cooking. In the center, a heavy wooden table holds everything. The oven is still warm from last night. She presses her hand flat against its side. The heat comes through slowly, deep and stored, like a stone that has been lying in the sun all afternoon. She opens the oven door. The coals are low, orange shapes resting in gray ash, barely glowing, but still alive. She bends close and blows gently. The ash shifts. The orange brightens. She builds the fire back up in stages. Dry straw first, then thin wood, then larger pieces as the flame takes hold. She kneels beside the oven and tends it carefully, not rushing. While the fire grows, she goes to the window and pushes the shutter open a few inches. The sky is still dark, but there is a change at the eastern horizon, a subtle shift from black to deep gray, something only someone watching for it would catch, a suggestion that the night has a direction. The road outside is empty. The pale stone catches what little moonlight remains. Olive trees on the far side stand without moving. She closes the shutter and returns to the oven. There is bread to make. The dough she prepared last night is sitting under a cloth at the end of the table. She lifts the cloth and presses her knuckles in. It gives slowly, cool and soft. She sets it on the table and begins to knead. Her hands have done this so many times that the motion is part of her body now. Push forward with the heel of the palm. Fold the edge back, turn a quarter. Push again. Fold. Turn. The dough warms and smooths under her hands. Felix had been helping for 2 years already, carrying water each morning before school. She thought of this as she shaped the 3 loaves and set them near the oven to rise. 2 years had gone quickly. She remembered him arriving the first morning, a boy sent by his mother to ask if there was any work he could do. She had looked at him in the doorway and thought, too young, too small for the heavy jars. But she had given him a smaller jar to start, and he had been careful with it, both hands on the handle, moving slowly so it would not tip. She had kept him on after that. Then she picks up the broom and moves through to the main room. Two wooden tables run its length, with benches on either side. She sweeps in long, slow strokes. Yesterday's dust, crumbs from last night's supper, a few wisps of straw from the courtyard. She pushes it all out through the front door. The sky is lighter now. She can see across the road to the olive trees. She stands in the doorway for a moment, broom in hand. The morning air is cool and still. The sky is definitely lighter now. The darkness thinned to a gray that shows the shapes of things. She can see across the road to the olive trees without trouble. She can see the road stretching away to the south, pale and quiet. Insects in the fields. A rooster somewhere further down the road, not yet insistent, just beginning. The sound of birds becoming more numerous in the olive trees with each passing minute. Their morning exchange building gradually. And beneath all of it, the faint sound of something moving on the road to the south, too far to see. Wheels, maybe, or hooves. She could not tell which. Already moving on their way to somewhere that was not here. She goes back inside, checks the water jars. One is nearly empty. She sets it near the door as a reminder. The well will need attention when it is fully light. She slides the 3 loaves into the oven with the long wooden paddle. She closes the door. She brushes the flour from her hands. Then she sits down on the low bench beside the oven and rests. This is the moment she has always liked best. The fire going, the bread in, the room warming, the smell beginning to rise, that soft, yeasty warmth that fills the kitchen before anyone else is awake. Outside, the first bird begins in the olive trees, then another, then more. The first person to appear is not a traveler from upstairs. It is Felix. He is 12 years old and lives a short walk north along the road. He has been coming every morning for 2 years now, arriving just before full light, staying until it is time for school. He carries water, he feeds the animals, he does whatever needs doing at that hour of the day. He is a quiet boy. He does not talk much in the mornings. He arrives, nods at Julia, and goes directly to whatever task is most obvious. He has good instincts for what needs doing, which is a useful thing in a helper. He is also reliable, which Julia values more than almost anything. He appears every morning that he says he will appear. He does not need to be told the same thing twice. When something changes, he adapts without fuss. She has had other helpers over the years who were less reliable, and she has learned to notice reliability when she sees it and not take it for granted. He arrives now, pushing the courtyard gate open with both hands. He sees Julia in the kitchen doorway, and she nods toward the empty jar by the door. He picks it up without a word and carries it to the well. Julia goes to the courtyard. 3 mules and 2 horses stand in the stalls along the east wall, belonging to the guests asleep upstairs. The mules watch her as she comes through the gate, their long ears tilting toward her. The horses are calmer, one of them barely bothering to look up. She moves slowly and speaks to them in a low voice, not saying anything in particular, just a steady, quiet sound. The kind of talking you do to animals, not because they understand the words, but because they understand the tone. She fills the water trough. She measures grain for each stall. She checks the straw, replacing what is too damp or too worn. By the time she finishes, Felix is back with the filled jar and already going for a second trip. The sun is rising. A thin line of gold has appeared above the hills to the east, the light casting long and horizontal across the road and the fields, catching everything in a warm color she has always found pleasant. A cart appears around the bend, an ox cart moving at its slow, steady pace, the driver sitting high with the reins loose. A farmer heading toward market, his cart loaded with something under cloth. He does not stop or look toward the inn. He is already focused on where he is going. A few minutes pass, then another traveler appears on foot. A man walking alone, moving at the slightly mechanical pace of someone who has been walking for hours. Wide-brimmed hat, leather bag over one shoulder. He stops at the gate and looks in. "Is there bread?" he calls. "There is bread," Julia calls back. He comes inside and sits at the table nearest the door. He sets his bag down and takes off his hat and rests them beside him carefully. He has the look of someone who started walking before dawn. She brings him bread still warm from the oven, a small clay pot of olive oil for dipping, and a cup of watered wine. He eats steadily, methodically, the way a person eats when they are genuinely hungry, tearing bread, dipping, chewing slowly. When he is halfway through, he looks up. "How far to the next inn south?" he asks. She tells him. 4 hours at a steady walk, a bridge over a shallow river about halfway, a stand of pine trees just before the inn itself. "Is the bridge holding?" he asks. "They repaired it last autumn," she says. "The footing is solid." He nods and goes back to his bread. She refills his cup without being asked. He pays with 2 small bronze coins, small worn coins with an emperor's head on one side, so rubbed by passing through so many hands that the face is barely recognizable anymore. He thanks her, puts his hat on, picks up his bag, and walks out the gate. She watches him shrink down the road to the south until the bend takes him from view. She has watched this happen thousands of times. A person arriving, eating, resting briefly, then continuing on. A few minutes of contact and then gone, the road taking them. She knows almost nothing about most of the people who pass through. From upstairs, she hears movement. A door, footsteps on wood. The day inside the inn is beginning. By mid-morning, all the overnight guests were downstairs and fed and mostly on their way. The merchant had come down first, a large man with a brisk manner who knew what he wanted and said so plainly. Traveling north with his assistant. Business in a city 2 days' walk away. He asked one quick question about the condition of the road north and seemed satisfied with the answer. They were gone before the others had finished eating. The family was slower, the parents worn in the bone-deep way that parents with small children are often worn. The children barely awake, blinking in the morning light, eating bread in small, slow bites. The younger one held out her cup with both hands until Julia took it and filled it. They had a long journey ahead. The mother said this while paying, almost as an apology for their slowness. Julia said it was no trouble. The mother looked like she needed to hear that. The 2 soldiers were last. They ate quickly and without much ceremony, the way soldiers eat. One of them fed small pieces of bread to a tan dog that had wandered in from the courtyard. The other watched without comment. They were heading west after this, getting closer to home after many months away. The taller one had a particular look Julia had seen before, the look of someone almost at the end of something, trying not to think about it too hard in case something delayed them. They paid and left together, boots loud on the stone threshold. Felix stayed another hour, helping with the animals as guests collected their mules and horses from the courtyard. Bags to be loaded, saddles to be checked. Julia helped load the merchant's mules. She noticed one of the horses belonging to a traveler, staying a second day, had a problem with its front left shoe. She mentioned it. The traveler looked surprised and then grateful. He would need a blacksmith at the next town. She knew there was one there. She told him. The courtyard emptied slowly. Then Felix left for school and she was alone. She went upstairs. The sleeping rooms needed resetting. She stripped the blankets from each bed and carried them down to hang in the courtyard where the morning sun could work on them. There was a particular satisfaction in this, in seeing the blankets hang in a row, the sun and air doing what they did to wool, freshening it without effort on her part. She replaced straw in the mattresses that had been slept on the hardest, pressing new handfuls in until the surface was reasonably level again. She swept the floors. She wiped the oil lamps with a clean cloth and checked their oil, refilling the ones that had burned down too far. This was slow, methodical work. Her hands knew it. She moved through the rooms at a steady pace, not rushing, letting the familiar sequence carry her forward. From upstairs through the small window of the front room, she could see the road from a different angle. More of it is visible here than from the kitchen window. Travelers approaching from further away, small shapes on pale stone growing gradually into people as they came closer. A woman with a bundle on her back. Two men walking together, talking as they walked. A cart coming slowly from the south. The driver sitting high with the reins easy in his hands. The world was moving out there. She thought about Marcus, the retired soldier who had stayed last week with his family. Moving to a new town, she wondered how far they had gotten. She hoped the weather had held for them. Most of the people who passed through she never thought about again. But some she thought about briefly, a day or two after, before they faded into the general stream of faces. Something about them had been particular enough to leave a trace, the soldier's look of a man almost home. The woman who had traveled alone and asked so little. She went back downstairs and put a pot on the fire for the midday meal. By the time it had begun to simmer, the road had changed. The morning movement was gone. The farmers heading to market, the merchants making early starts, the walkers who had risen before dawn and were now far along their routes. All of them had passed or settled somewhere. Around midday, the road grew quiet. The light was bright and the air was warm. Travelers who had been walking since early morning were resting somewhere. Those who had started later had slowed. Julia pulled a low wooden stool to the front doorway and sat in the shadow of the wall. She had brought her mending, a piece of linen torn along one edge. She worked with a bone needle, her stitches small and even. the kind of work she could do while watching the road. The road was not completely empty. A cart passed heading north, then a man on horseback at a trot, moving with the focused pace of someone carrying a message somewhere. He was past before she had time to do more than register him. Then a small group of 3 people on foot, deep in conversation, not looking toward the inn at all. She watched them go. There was also bookkeeping. She kept 2 tablets, a small wooden one with a wax surface for daily figures, pressed with a bronze stylus and easily smoothed when she needed the surface again, and a harder clay tablet for the permanent record, marks pressed in deep and left to dry, becoming part of the clay itself. She reviewed the week, coins in from overnight guests, coins from travelers who stopped for food but did not stay, coins paid out for grain, for oil, for salt, a small amount paid to a man who had repaired a section of the courtyard drain. The Roman coins had their own logic. The small bronze ones for daily transactions worn and rubbed smooth from so many hands. A few silver ones set aside for larger purchases at the market in town. The numbers balanced more or less. The inn made enough to maintain itself and feed the people who ran it. She put the tablets away and looked up. The road in the midday quiet had its own population, not the merchants and farmers of the morning rush. At this hour, it was different people. A man moving slowly with a staff and a heavy pack, the pace of someone who had many days still ahead of him. 2 women who appeared to be sisters, walking together, talking without stopping. A small cart pulled by a donkey, the driver asleep on the seat, the donkey following the road out of long habit. She watched them pass one by one. None of them stopped. None of them looked toward the inn. There was something restful about watching travelers who were not going to stop, just passing through, like water past a stone. She did not need to do anything for them. She could simply watch. A postal rider went past at speed. Government horse, lean and fast, moving with the urgency of someone whose time belonged to someone else. She had seen riders like this all her life. They used the road at all hours, relays of them carrying messages across the whole connected network of roads. A dispatch that left a city 3 days north could reach a city 4 days south in less time than it would take a merchant to travel a single day's route. She watched him go. He was not Titus. Different build, different horse. The postal routes were covered by many riders. Titus had explained it to her once on one of his brief stops, how the relay system worked. A rider took a sealed dispatch as far as the next relay post, perhaps 8 or 10 miles, where a fresh horse was waiting. He handed off the dispatch and the new rider continued. The dispatch itself never stopped. It moved through the countryside hour by hour, day and night, faster than any single rider could sustain. The effect was that news from far away arrived with a kind of speed that still surprised people who thought about it. The world was large, but the roads made it smaller. The sight of the rider reminded her of the week before, when Titus had come through and told her that a large military unit had been moving north along one of the parallel roads. Not this road, but the wider one a few miles east. He had seen them early in the morning, moving in formation, their equipment on carts. He did not know where they were going. Messengers often knew what was in their dispatches, but not always what it meant in the larger picture. She had noted it without alarm. Armies had moved up and down these roads her whole life. They were part of the road the way weather was part of the road. She set her mending down for a moment and watched the empty road. The lizard was back on the wall beside the door. The same spot it always chose, the warm stone just to the left of the door frame where the afternoon sun hit longest. Its sides expanded and contracted with each breath. Very fast, a quick flickering motion that was easy to miss if you were not looking for it. She had been seeing lizards in this spot, or lizards very much like them, for as long as she could remember. She went back to her mending. Then she dealt with the bench. One of the benches in the main room had a loose leg, a slow widening of the joint over weeks. She brought it outside to the better light. The tendon had shrunk slightly with the dry autumn air, leaving a gap. A wedge would fix it. In a country inn, you learned to make things last. Wood for repairs was not always at hand. You kept scraps, learned to shape what you had into what you needed. She found a piece the right size and tapped it in with a smooth stone. She set the bench on the ground and sat on it. It did not move. She carried it back inside. The afternoon was deepening. The shadows had begun their slow lengthening. The road was showing movement again, travelers picking themselves up from wherever they had rested and starting forward. The afternoon was beginning. Late afternoon was the time Julia thought of as the filling of the inn. Every day, sometime after the midday quiet, travelers started appearing with a different kind of purpose. Not the quick stop for bread, not the passing through. These were people calculating the hours of light remaining against the distance to the next stopping point. And the calculation was saying, "Stop here." The first to arrive was a woman traveling alone. She was perhaps 50, with gray threaded through her dark hair and the unhurried way of moving that comes from many days on the road. She had a compact gray mule carrying her bags. She looked at the inn as she came through the gate with a practical, assessing expression. Julia showed her the rooms. The woman checked window shutters, pressed her hand against the mattress. She did this without embarrassment, the way someone does who has made quick decisions about accommodation many times. She took the room at the end of the upstairs passage, the quietest one. The woman paid and came back downstairs to sit at the table with watered wine while she waited for supper. The second group arrived soon after, 3 men walking together with the easy, synchronized pace of people who had been traveling in company for some time. The employees of a wool trader, they explained, who would arrive behind them on horseback. He sent his men ahead to secure the rooms and settle the animals while he covered the last distance faster on horseback. The wool trade moved through this road regularly. She had been seeing wool merchants for her whole life, their mules loaded with bales, heading to the cities where cloth was made or the markets where it was sold. She recognized the type, if not always the face. She showed them to the 2 larger rooms. Their merchant arrived an hour later, a sharp-featured man on a good horse with 2 laden mules behind him. He dismounted and handed the reins to the youngest of his men and looked at the inn with the practiced efficiency of someone who had stayed in many inns and had clear ideas about what was acceptable and what was not. He found it acceptable. He said nothing specific to indicate this. He simply came inside and sat down and called for wine, which she had come to understand was how men like him expressed satisfaction. Then came the family, a retired soldier named Marcus and his wife and their grown son, traveling with a cart loaded with their household goods. They were moving to a new town, the wife explained. They had sold their house. The town they were going to had more work. The son had connections there. She had said all of this many times already on this journey. Julia could hear it in the rhythm of the telling. Julia helped them settle their things. The evening was coming on, the sun dropping below the hills, the sky going through its colors. She moved between the courtyard and the kitchen with increased purpose. Animals to feed, lamps to fill and light. The stew that had been simmering since mid-afternoon needed checking. Felix came back after school, appearing at the courtyard gate as the light went golden. She put him to work immediately. Water to the animals, cups and bowls set out, bread wrapped and ready. The evening smell of the inn came on. Wood smoke and stew and the dry warmth of the stone walls releasing the day's heat. Oil lamps lit and glowing on the tables. The sound of guests settling upstairs. Footsteps moving back and forth on the wooden floor. The low sound of voices. Outside, the road was emptying for the night. The last travelers who would pass this section were passing. She could see the occasional figure moving fast, trying to reach somewhere before full dark. A man alone, moving at a pace just short of running. A woman on a small horse, spurring it on. She had watched people hurry to beat the dark her whole life. Everyone on the road knew the calculation. You wanted to be inside somewhere before the light was fully gone. Not because the road was unsafe exactly, just because the dark changed everything, made the familiar unfamiliar, made distances uncertain. She hoped they made it. The inn was warm and lit, and the stew was ready. If they did not make it to wherever they were going, they would see the light from the gate, and they would know there was still room. There was always room. Then she went into the kitchen to finish the supper. When the last daylight left the sky, Julia moved through the main room with a small burning taper and lit the oil lamps one by one. They were small clay shapes with a wick floating in a finger's depth of olive oil. Each one made a circle of warm gold that reached about an arm's length, but there were enough of them that the room, once all were lit, felt inhabited and warm, the circles overlapping at the edges. She stepped back and looked at the room in the lamplight. The same room she had swept that morning. The same tables and benches, the same cups on the shelf. But in the lamplight it was different, smaller, more enclosed, the shadows pushing the walls inward, making the room feel held and separate from the dark road outside. The guests came down. The woman traveling alone came first. She had washed her face and changed her clothes. She sat at her end of the table and looked at the nearest lamp flame with a faraway expression. The wool merchant's men came next, louder, settling along the center of the table with the easy air of people who had done this many times. Marcus and his wife came together slowly. Their son followed and sat beside his father. The wool merchant himself came last and sat at the end nearest the door, where he could see the room and the entrance at the same time. Julia brought the stew: lentils, onions, dried vegetables, a small amount of salted pork, thickened with barley, bread in a cloth lined basket, still warm, wine and water in separate jugs. The first part of supper was quiet. People were hungry. Then the wool merchant asked Marcus where he was coming from. The soldier named the town. "The road north of there has a new section," the merchant said. "They relayed 2 miles of it. Very smooth." Marcus said he had noticed that. They had come through 2 days ago. Someone mentioned flooding to the south. A river had risen, and a lower section of road was under water for a short stretch. The merchant's men noted it. One of them would take the high track if that was still the case. Another traveler said the price of grain had risen sharply in the city 2 days north. The merchant considered this. It matched something he had heard at his last stop. He said so. "Has anyone come through from the east recently?" The woman at the end of the table asked. She had been quiet until now. "I am looking for a wool trader named Quintus. Older man, travels with a black mule." The merchant's men thought about it. One of them had seen a man matching that description near a crossroads 3 days south. He could not be certain. The woman nodded and stored the information. The son of Marcus asked one of the merchant's men whether the market in a certain town was still held on the same day of the week. It was important for their timing. The merchant's man knew. He had been there 3 weeks ago. He described the market briefly. The son listened carefully. Julia moved in and out of the kitchen, keeping track of the stew bowl, refilling cups, bringing more bread. She listened as she worked. She had been listening to these tables her whole life. Every evening, the same kind of exchange, different people carrying different pieces of the same vast, scattered picture. A bridge repaired here, a market disrupted there. A road that had been difficult now cleared. A town that had grown. A merchant who had died and left his roots to his son. She could not have said exactly where most of these places were. She had never traveled more than a day's walk from this road. But through these conversations, she had built up a picture of a world much larger than the road she looked at every day. A picture assembled from fragments, a piece at a time, over many years. This was what she thought of as the exchange. People coming from different directions, carrying different news, sitting together, and letting it mix. She heard things at this table that she would not have known otherwise. Which roads were flooded, which bridges had been repaired, where grain prices had risen this season, which mountain paths had reopened after a late storm. This was how information moved in this world. Person to person, table to table, inn to inn along a road, not written down mostly, not sent by formal messenger, just talked about, repeated, carried forward by whoever happened to be going in the right direction. The inn, she sometimes thought, was a kind of crossroads that stayed still while the world moved through it. The evening wore on. The woman excused herself first, quietly. The soldier's wife went next, helped gently to the stairs by her son. The merchant's men dispersed one by one. The merchant himself sat a while longer, turning a coin over in his fingers, looking at something in the middle distance. Then he set the coin down and went upstairs. Marcus sat alone for a few minutes. He was not looking at anything, just sitting with his hands around his cup. resting with the weight of it. He had that look again, the one she had noticed when he arrived. A man almost at the end of something long. He caught her eye and lifted the cup slightly. She brought the jug over. He poured a small amount and drank it. "Many nights like this," he said, not quite to her. "Along roads like this one." She stayed near for a moment without answering. He set the cup down. "Good stew," he said. Then he got up and went upstairs. Julia moved through the quiet inn. She went to each lamp and pressed the wick down into the oil. The room dimmed with each one, the circles of gold disappearing until only the kitchen light remained. In the kitchen, she checked the stew pot, poured water in to soak, covered the remaining bread with a cloth. She checked the oven, arranging the coals so they would burn slowly through the night. She checked the front door. The heavy wooden beam dropped into its brackets. She checked the courtyard gate. The wooden bolt slid through its iron rings. The courtyard was still. The animals were quiet. The gray mule belonging to the woman upstairs had its eyes closed. Its weight shifted onto 3 legs. She stood in the center of the courtyard and looked up. The sky was clear and full of stars, more visible than usual because the air was dry and still. No clouds anywhere between here and the horizon. She had grown up in a world where the sky at night always looked like this on clear nights. No other lights to compete. No glow from anywhere. Just the stars in their thousands. The broad river of light across the center. Familiar patterns she had known since she was old enough to look up and be curious about them. Her mother had known the names of the patterns and had told them to her when she was small. She had forgotten some of the names, but not the patterns. They were still there every clear night, exactly where they had always been, exactly the brightness they had always been. She had heard travelers talk about the stars. Some of the travelers who came through were educated men who knew the stars as tools for finding their way. They could read direction from them, estimate time of night from their position, know what season was coming by which ones were visible before dawn. She knew a little of this herself, absorbed from years of watching and listening. Enough to know that the night was about halfway through. From the olive trees across the road, an owl called, a short, flat sound, almost conversational. Then nothing. She listened to the insects in the fields, rising and falling in the dark, that deep, comfortable rhythm of the countryside at night. She had been falling asleep to this sound her whole life. Far down the road to the south, something moved in the darkness. She could not see what. A night animal probably crossing between fields, or possibly a very late traveler finding their way by starlight, which was enough light if you knew the road and the night was clear. She wished them well. Not out loud, but quietly, the way she sometimes did. She went inside. She took the lamp to her room. She sat on the edge of the bed and removed her sandals. She lowered the wick until the flame was barely a point of orange. The building breathed around her. Wood settling. The faint creak of someone turning in their sleep above her. The animals in the courtyard making small sounds. Then She lay down. Tomorrow the road would begin again, and then again the day after that, and after that, days becoming weeks, weeks becoming seasons, the inn turning with the year the way it always had, the same rhythms returning in the same order, each one familiar enough to feel almost like rest. The road changed with the seasons, and the inn changed with the road. Spring came in stages. The mud came first. The winter rains left the road soft in places, the edges uneven. Carts came through, leaving ruts that dried into ridges. Julia kept rags near the front door in spring. Travelers arrived with sandals heavy with clay, cloaks splattered, everything damp. But the mud meant motion. After the long quiet of winter, the road came back to life. Merchants who had been waiting for better conditions set off on their routes. Farmers headed to market with the first of the new season's goods. Families who had waited out the cold months finally started moving. The inn filled most nights in spring. The stew pot was larger. She baked more bread. She liked spring at the inn. The energy of beginning. The feeling that the world was opening again after the long closed feeling of winter. New faces at the table that she would come to know over the years ahead, though she did not know that yet when she first saw them. The fig tree near the gate grew a little more each spring. She had been watching it do this her whole life. Taller than her now by many feet, its branches reaching far enough over the road that tall loads sometimes had to angle through carefully. Summer was harder. The heat came down on the road like something physical. Travelers arrived in the afternoons dried out and quiet, asking for water before wine, going to their rooms as soon as they could. The kitchen was difficult in summer. She tried to have the baking finished before the heat peaked. Even so, the kitchen by midday was a room she did not stay in long. She developed the habit in summer of going to the well in the early evening and pouring water over her wrists and the back of her neck. It helped, but summer had its own beauty in the late afternoon. After the worst heat passed, a breeze coming through the olive trees, the light going golden on the stone, the shadows long and blue. Autumn was her favorite season. The harvest brought life back to the road in a different way from spring. Not the tentative motion of things beginning, but the full, loaded movement of things completing. Carts piled high with grain, wine merchants heading in all directions, the faint smell of new wine on their clothes, olive harvesters moving between estates with long wooden poles. The inn was almost always full in the harvest weeks. Supper in autumn was long and warm. People had more to talk about, a good harvest or a disappointing one, a field that had done better than expected, a new strain of grape that produced less but sweeter. The merchant she had known for years always stopped twice in autumn, once heading out to buy and once heading back with his load. He had been stopping here so long that his face coming through the gate felt as natural as a season changing. He always asked her to set aside the same room for him. He always ate the same amount and paid the same way, and asked the same questions about the road. Titus usually came through twice in autumn, too, the roads being busier and therefore the dispatches more frequent. In autumn, his news was mostly about harvests and prices and the movement of goods. He delivered it in the same brisk way he delivered everything, and was gone before the lamp in the courtyard had finished swaying from the speed of his departure. Winter came in stages, first the rains, then the cold, then the short days and long nights, and the road that sometimes went days with almost no one on it. She used the winter for the work she could not do when the inn was busy: deep cleaning, repairs, rebuilding the section of wall that had crumbled, replacing straw in all the mattresses. The evenings were quiet. She sat by the kitchen fire and did small work with her hands, mending, sorting, organizing the stores for the next season. Felix sometimes came by in winter evenings. Not every evening, but enough. He would sit across the table, and they would talk about small things: the road, his family, what work was coming in the spring, what repairs the inn needed, nothing that required much effort on either side, the kind of conversation that fills time and keeps the quiet from becoming too large. She was glad of it. He had brought his wife once in winter, a quiet woman who worked with cloth in the town and who looked at the inn with the alert curiosity of someone seeing a place she had heard described for years. They had stayed for supper, and it had been pleasant. She had liked having the inn feel like a home that night rather than a place of business. The cloth merchant came once in late autumn each year, heading south with whatever she had acquired over the summer months. She would stay 2 nights, which was unusual. Most people moving on business stayed 1. But she was at the halfway point of her longest route. She had explained once. She allowed herself the 2nd night. Julia always made sure the front room was ready for her, the one with the road view, the one that caught the morning light at the right angle and gave you the longest view south before the road curved. The cloth merchant always seemed to know what the room would look like before she saw it, the way someone knows a familiar place. In winter, the kitchen fire was the center of things. Everything else drew toward it: the warmth of it, the smell of it, the sound it made, that particular settling crackle of a fire in a clay oven in a stone room, a sound that had surrounded her since before she could walk. Winter felt like the inn breathing out after the long, busy breath of the rest of the year, and she did not mind that. Everything needed its season of rest. The seasons continued in their familiar order: spring after winter, summer after spring, harvest after heat, the mud and then the dust and then the golden light and then the cold again, year after year. And after a while, Julia stopped counting them. The years passed in the way that years pass when each one is filled with ordinary things. You do not notice them leaving. You notice only that they have gone. Felix grew up. He was a boy, and then a young man, and then a man. Each change seemed gradual until she looked at him one morning and saw a stranger, and then looked more carefully and saw Felix. He stopped coming in the mornings when his school years ended. A few years later, he started stopping by in the evenings, not as a helper, but as someone who had grown used to the inn's company. He became easier as he got older. Eventually, he brought his younger brothers, and they took up the morning work without needing much teaching. Some travelers she saw once and never again, a face appearing one evening and gone the next morning. She knew the beginning of each story, and then the road took them, and that was all she got. She had stopped thinking of it as a loss. A beginning was not nothing. She had fed people who were tired and sent them on slightly more ready for whatever came next. She had been part of their story even if she would never know the rest of it. Some she saw many times. The salt merchant who traveled this route every few months became a familiar figure over the years. Same room, same end of the table, same question about the road ahead. She watched his hair go gray and then white, watched him switch from horse to mule, watched his assistant disappear one season and be replaced. She never asked about the first one. That was the unspoken agreement of the road. You noted the absence and adjusted. There was also the cloth merchant, a woman who came through 3 or 4 times a year. Always alone, always brisk, always taking the front room where she could hear the road. And Titus, a government messenger who stopped every few weeks for water and bread and never more. He had a habit of leaving behind whatever news he had gathered. A bridge repaired, a road washed out, grain prices rising. She looked forward to these short visits. He saw more road in a week than most people saw in a month. He always left with a brief nod. And then he was gone before she had finished watching him go. Then a son appeared with the salt merchant. Younger, sharper, more energy in his movements. She watched him grow more confident each visit. Watched the merchant defer to him on small things and then larger ones. One spring, the merchant came through alone. No son, no assistant, just himself and a single mule. She did not ask. But after supper, he sat at the table alone, turning his cup in his hands. He has his own roots now, he said. That is good, she said. He nodded. When she came back from the kitchen, his coin was on the table and he was gone upstairs. The inn changed in small ways over the years. A wall rebuilt, the oven relined, new benches, a new paddle for the bread. Small changes, but they added up. Her knees felt the cold more than they used to. The first few steps across the kitchen floor in the mornings were slower. She kept her sandals beside the bed. Her mother had run this inn before her. Her mother's hands had kneaded dough on this same table. Her mother had stood in this same doorway watching the road fill each morning. There was a continuity to that which she felt more than she could explain. The road did not change. The same flat stones laid by people long dead, carrying the same traffic in the same directions. And at the side of this road, in every generation, someone had been awake before dawn, building the fire back up and setting the bread to rise. She was still here. The road was still here. There was something in that which felt on good days like enough. Tonight, the inn is quiet. The guests are asleep upstairs. The fire has settled. Marta is sitting outside on the stone bench near the front gate. The road in front of her is empty. The stone surface catches the starlight and holds it as a faint, pale glow. Far to the north, the road curves around a low hill and disappears. Far to the south, it goes straight for a long time and then does the same. She sits with her hands in her lap. The owl is back in the olive trees. The same short, flat sound at intervals. The same owl she has been hearing for so long that she cannot remember it being absent. Marta had never thought of her life as unusual. It was simply the life she had been given. Fires to light, bread to bake, travelers to feed, a road to watch. Year after year, the same things in the same order, with the same small variations that came from weather and seasons and the particular people who happened to appear at the gate on any given evening. She had not expected anything else. She had not wanted anything else mostly. There were nights early on when she had wondered what lay at the ends of all these roads, what the cities looked like that the travelers mentioned, what it felt like to move through the world rather than stay in one place and let the world move through you. But that wondering had faded over time, replaced by something else. A familiarity with this place so deep that she could feel it in the dark. The exact distance from her bed to the kitchen door. The weight of the paddle in her hands when the bread went in. The temperature of the well water in each season and how it changed. The way the first bird always began in the same olive tree. She knew when the coals needed tending without looking at them, just from how the air in the kitchen felt. She knew by the sound of a cart coming down the road whether it was loaded or empty, how many animals were pulling it, roughly how fast it was moving. This knowledge had no name. It was not something you could carry away or describe to someone else. It lived in the body, in the hands and the ears, and the particular tiredness at the end of a particular kind of day. Felix had asked her once years ago when he was still coming every morning whether she ever wanted to travel. He had been young enough that the question felt genuine. She had thought about it honestly. Not really, she had told him. He had looked at her with the expression of someone who had not fully understood the answer. But she had meant it. This was not a small thing what she had here. The road brought her the world. She did not need to go to the world. The world came to her gate every morning. Somewhere down the road, far away, she can just make out the faint glow of a lamp. A window in a farmhouse, probably. Someone awake late for reasons she does not know. She watches it for a while. The fire behind her is barely there now. Warmth at her back, faint and gentle. The stone bench is cool under her. The stars are very clear. The insects are still going in the fields, their sound rising and falling. The same sound they make every night of every year. The same sound they were making long before she was born. She breathes in the night air, wood smoke, cool earth, the faint mineral smell of the road stone, the very slight smell of straw from the courtyard. She has been breathing this same combination of smells her whole life at the end of the day. She cannot imagine what the end of the day smells like without it. The owl is quiet now. The distant lamp is still. The road is empty. Fires to light tomorrow, bread to bake, the road bringing whoever it brings. New faces for some of them, familiar ones for others. The salt merchant due through sometime next week, she thought. Titus, perhaps by the end of the month. The ordinary forward motion of ordinary days. She sits a while longer, then she goes inside. The inn is quiet around her as she moves through it in the dark. She does not need the lamp. She knows every distance, every doorway, every change in the floor. The slight step up into the kitchen, the particular creak of the third floor board near the oven, the way the air in her room is always a little cooler than the kitchen. She lies down. The darkness settles. Outside, the road is still and quiet, as it is every night between the last cart of the evening and the first cart of the morning. And the night goes on.